tool's already started to cut on the surface of the bearing. And all we're doing is following that factory 120-degree groove. But we're going all the way around the bearing. Cutting the depth of this bearing, same groove as the same depth as the factory bearing. So now it's time for us to move our tooling out of the way. Shut this down. Wipe out a little bit of our metal shavings here and filings. I know this looks a little brutal on the surface of a bearing, but I can assure you this isn't hurting a thing. And now we have a full groove, same size as the factory groove, all the way around this entire bearing. And the only thing we have to do is a little bit of deburring. So now our bearing tool comes apart. Removed all the bolts from our bearing holder. We're taking the bearing out, and we're going to pop it out of the holder. One bearing. Two bearings. And by looking at these bearings, all we've got to do is a little bit of deburring to do. And that's easily accomplished with Mr. Utility Knife here. We just go ahead and slowly deburr the surface. They make deburring tools for this to do it. This seems to work fine. It's taking a very slight, that slight burr that's right on the face of the bearing. We're taking that bearing right off, that little burr. And there you have it, a fully grooved Dodge Viper oiling system main bearing. And this is going to provide extra oiling to our thrust surfaces, and it's going to go ahead and provide full 360-degree oiling to the rod bearing, exactly as the GT2 motor Chrysler produced for its racing series, with the smaller main bearing, which is also fully grooved. However, that is a copy of the bearing that came out of the 426 Hemis from years ago, which proves that old technology still works today. And we're making these bearings, and they work. Tried them in my car, have fully grooved bearings in it now. They work fine. I'm having no rod failures, no anything, and I'm putting out 611 horse at less than 5,500 RPM, and I'm doing it with mostly factory parts, and I'm not having any trouble with bearings. So these do work.
What do you need to do with oil pumps and oil pressures, since you have such a large oil opening on your bearing surfaces?
In the Dodge Viper, there are two different relief springs. What I've done is I've added a 30,000 shim under each one of the relief springs. Really doesn't give it a whole lot of oil, extra oil pressure. It's just a little bit of reassurance that I got more oil. And I don't run the oil full. I think there's a windage condition that goes ahead and occurs. I find when you run a little bit less oil in them, even though it stays in the pan the best it can, there's still plenty of oil in there. And now, we did this on a used bearing that we just spun on the dyno for a while to see what it would do. We still believe that this bearing is your better bearing to go ahead and use. It takes some more modifications. This bearing is a brand new bearing, and it already has got light marks on it and everything else just from handling. We don't think it hurts the bearing at all, but this, with its thrust surfaces on it, extra grooves, it has more than the regular Dodge Viper one. It has additional slots and spacing for oiling. This is your bearing to go ahead and use. Now this tool also puts the grooves in this bearing. But if you use this bearing in a Dodge Viper, remember, change your indexing tabs and cut these little tabs out inside your block. And we use a very, very simple tool to cut it with. This. It looks butcherous, but this tool, when put inside the block, you can cut a nice groove for these little tangs to go ahead and fit into. So when you use this big wide bearing, you're going to want to make sure you got plenty of clearance in the block for this to fit, and relocate your tab on the other side, and by all means put a full groove in it and cut this groove out of the back of the block so you've got oiling. This is your better bearing to use.